Hello everyone who may or may not be interested in the topic of this video but has come to watch it anyways. Today I'm going to be discussing really the resolution of 35mm film and film in general. What we have here is a shot that I took a few months ago on Fuji Xperia 400 on my Canon Rebel 2000 using a really cheap, well, free kit lens, the 28 to 80 millimeter 3.5 to 5.6 Mark III, and which is not really known for being very sharp. However, as you can see in this 42 megapixel scan, there is a bucket, no, rather a water tower of detail that I was not expecting to really be there when I first scanned it. So I scanned this using my A7 III, my Sony A7 III with a Sigma Art macro lens and an extension tube, or a set of extension tubes, really cheap Velo ones, got those for $9 or so. And I was able to pull this much detail from 35mm film. You look at this and you think, is this 6x9, 6x7 medium format? But no, it's just 35mm. It's on a, with a cheap lens on cheap Walmart basically film, drugstore film. This is something, a roll I got for like $3, and it came out unbelievably sharp. Now this is down-resed in a Lightroom from a 90 megapixel or 89.6 megapixel original scan. And even in that, you could see that there was a load of detail in areas like the twigs on this tree, in these bushes, all over the frame. Even over here, you could see a piece of a sled that I broke a few months ago by accident. And in the brambles over here, every inch of the frame is filled with detail at 42 megapixels, which you can see here, if it loads, to be the case. 8,000 by 5,250 pixels, and a 45 megabyte JPEG, which I don't really know how compressed this is. I think this is like 8 out of 12 compression setting, but as you can see, yeah, it really lives up to the 42 megapixel moniker. And the reason I'm posting this video is not to start, an argument, but simply to show that film has, a lot more detail than people typically give it credit for. Now, if you look on the internet on very reputable sources, there's many sites which publish, specs for the resolution of film, and they will quote generally 35mm film having between 12 and 20 megapixels of detail, 20 being foremost, maximum amount. And that's for like, slide film or Ectar 100. This is a 400 speed consumer film, and I'm pulling 42 megapixels or more if it was drum scanned from this. Now what this tells me is that what we should be doing is scanning our film at between 6 and 8,000 dpi. Now the only way to really do that is to scan it using a drum scanner, or like I did with the macro and extension tubes. The problem with the macro and extension tubes is you can have lots of stitching errors, you can have, color inversion errors. I mean, the colors in my inversion are not really as I would, really like them. And there is stitching errors in this file. I'll have to restitch this later. As you can see, this part was simply due to my camera on the tripod shaking when I was doing the macro shot of the film. And that, when it got stitched in, it results in this area of lower detail. But the fact is that if you were shooting in medium format or large format, you can get significantly more detail than even this, and this is a lot. This is up there with the best, full frame digital sensors that were from like last generation, like the A7R2, the A7R3. They were 42 megapixels, I think, as well, and this is 42 megapixels. And if you look at the dynamic range, it's up there as well. I mean, this isn't even really a flat scan. I pulled the blacks a little down and I raised the whites a little to get the contrast up because it was just too flat. But here you can see I think I metered this at least 13 stops between some of the parts, like this window frame and these shadows, I believe, are about 13 or more stops apart. The thing about dynamic ranges, though, every manufacturer measures it differently, so you're never really going to get a super good numerical value for this that's, accurate across all cameras, across all films, so you just have to do it compared photo to photo, I guess. And you can see that this has a lot. And in this camera, which cost me $30, and I'm getting A7R2 resolution. Now, of course, there is a lot of grain present here, but it's not unpleasant. In fact, I'd say it actually adds to the image, whereas digital noise, and this would be the equivalent of, I don't know how much, but maybe, 1600 ISO digital noise, but, or more than that even, but digital noise looks bad, it doesn't look good. I think, at least. That's just a personal opinion, but I don't think it looks very good. And this film grain looks really quite pleasing, and it's really not that obtrusive even at this incredible resolution for 35mm film. Yeah, there's a few more. I think I had an issue with film flatness down here, but in the middle of the frame where everything was kind of ideal, I'm pulling incredible amounts of resolution. So if you think about it, if you can shoot medium format, which is, 4 to 5 times bigger than this, you can get that much more detail. And large format, 4x5 is 14 to 15 times bigger than 35mm. The issue you run into then is diffraction, because you have to stop the aperture down to compensate for the much shallower depth of field, and the lenses simply being not as sharp, because they're much more complicated to make those larger lenses, which cover larger formats. But at optimum apertures with zero shake, you can surely pull at least from large format, 4x5, at least 200 or 300 megapixels, and medium format at least 3 times this, I'd think, because the lenses aren't that much worse. Say if you have a Mamiya 7 or something like that, you're gonna get really sharp lenses and really a lot of detail out of this. And I think the only way to truly see how much detail is in the negative or the slide is to scan it at a super high resolution and then down-res it, as I have here. And that mitigates a lot of the clumping of grain that you'll see in lower resolution scans. So if you scan it at, say, like 24 megapixels or whatever from a lab, even 32, you'll notice that there's more grain present than there is in this scan. And that's because at lower resolutions the grain sort of appears to clump and give the appearance of more grain than there actually is in the negative, which is why when you're printing or projecting film, it seems to have a lot less grain than the scans do. This is, yeah, as I was saying, this is a hot, medium speed consumer film. If you were shooting Portra 400, Portra 160, Ektar 100, you'd be getting even less grain and an even sharper image. And what if you were shooting, a much sharper lens, a Canon L lens, Zeiss lens, or a Leica? You could be getting even more resolution than this, and I think this is, perfectly adequate for all intensive purposes, but it's simply a fact that there's more than, the 20 megapixels of resolution that's often quoted. I mean, you can see it for yourself right here. 42 megapixels in the scan, and none of it is particularly soft. Now, I did sharpen this to 50 in Lightroom, 50 on the slider. The radius was 1, and there was no masking. But that isn't really a lot of sharpening, and it doesn't look unpleasant. Again, it doesn't look over sharpened at all, I think. I think it looks pretty alright. Looking at the whole image, you could print this really big, and it's just incredible to me. I was super surprised by this result after all that I'd heard about, 35mm not having that much resolution, but clearly, under the right circumstances, it can. And I think in this case it's because of these areas of high contrast, because film in areas of high contrast has a greater resolution than in areas of low contrast. So these branches, which are in the highlights, are right in front of the shadows, which, allows for really high contrast and fine detail. But even in these bushes, which aren't that, contrasty between the green here and the darker areas right next to it, you can still see that there's a lot of resolution. So, in the end, you know, I understand that a lot of people, including myself who shoot film, shoot it for the process, the slowing down, the thinking about your composition. And the general consensus is that if you want, clean quality, you go digital. And if you want that grittier aesthetic, if you want that slower process, then you go film. But it's clear here that, even with 35 millimeter, the smallest generally available format, I know 110 is a thing, but this is, the smallest popular format, you can get very exceptional resolution and detail out. And if you were, optically enlarging and printing, I'm sure you could get even more out of this if you're using a sharp and larger lens. But I was just staggered by this, and I thought I would put out a video just as an informational guide, sort of, about these things. So to recap, you know, my recommendations are drum scan film or DSLR scan. I would avoid flatbed because flatbed simply cannot go over like 3200 to 4000 DPI. And if you are drum scanning or DSLR scanning, scan to 6 to 8000 DPI, I would say, and then downscale it in Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever software you have to maybe 30 to 40 megapixels, and you'll see that there is plenty of detail here to be used for whatever purpose you may. And in the future, I'm going to put out more videos, probably about other 35mm stocks, like I said earlier, Ektar, Portra, the lower ISO stocks, professional stocks, and in different formats. And I have a 6x9 camera and a 4x5, so I can put out videos on similar scans at that resolution from those as well to see whether they scale up in the same manner of resolution as, opposed to film size. So you can see, hopefully I'll have those up soon within the next few weeks. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this to be very informative, because I just thought this was super interesting, and see you guys next time.